sure what's going wrong with them, but it's really getting silly now. So yes, I'm just going to wait and see if anybody turns up. It's a very soggy evening in Edinburgh, and I'm still having to wear my sandals because of my big toe. It's not good. Right. Let's just hope we can... Hi Claire, can you hear me? Hopefully you can hear me. The lip sync will be out, just ignore it. Probably. You're with me, excellent. Somebody could just put in that they can hear me. Good audio, thank you. You honestly couldn't make it up, it's terrible. I think I'm just going to give up on Streamlabs because it just does not seem to be working now, and it's causing more bother than it's saving. So we'll just need to... Hi everyone, I'm glad you made it over. Oh, and I'm going to have to go and try and sort out whatever's gone on with Streamlabs, so hopefully everyone can spot this and comes over. So yes, I don't think I've seen you since we made it over the 4,000. So it's all exciting. Now I have to work out what to do with everything, because that's been a bit of a learning curve as well. But all the features are now on the back end, so I can see that. Excellent. Yeah, I was so excited. I really was. It was nice because it'll just make everything more easier for people to be able to become a member, or what do they call them? Supers instead of tips. I've not seen any of that yet. I'm going to have to try and watch somebody that's got 4,000 so I can see what these are. Because apparently there's like things you can buy or something. I don't know. So I'm going to have to do some digging around and try and work that out. But it was just such a relief to get there. So yeah, over the next week or so, you should start to see everything sort of settling down on it. Oh, thanks. I wouldn't have done it if it hadn't been for, all you, everybody that's played in the background. I thank you all. Right, well, it's absolutely bucketing down, so I'm just going to venture out and hope for the best. But I'm going to turn you around because you don't need to see me. Here you are. Right, so we're actually technically still in the lawn market part of the Royal Mile, and I was going to start along and do the full version of part 2, but since it's raining so heavily I'm going to just trim it down a bit. So in the lawn market, which is a lovely area, parts of it date back to the 1400s, so you can imagine there's a lot of history here. So in this area we had the Lord President of the Court of Session, Sir George Lockhart, living in Old Bank Close, which is kind of over where the red hoarding is, where the red phone box, just about that area, and he was living there. Now his story starts, or his murder story starts, with a man called John Cheesley. Now he lived in Dalry, and he was a businessman. He was very successful, he was very rich. He was also a bit of a brute and a womanizer, and very much an absent husband. So he was married to Margaret, but he didn't really spend that much time at home, and he had 10 or 11 children. There's a bit of debate over whether it was 10 or 11, but anyway, he had a lot of children with Margaret. And then one day he just decided that he'd had enough of married life and he wanted to get a divorce, and he didn't want to give Margaret or the children any kind of financial support. He just wanted rid of them. He'd had enough, that was it, he didn't need them anymore. So it went to court, and the judge presiding over it was Sir George Lockhart, who was very well respected in the legal community in Scotland. And he had been a judge for a long time. He'd been working, I'll just step back in case he catches the pavement. Now, Sir George Lockhart found in favour of Margaret, and he awarded her £93 per annum for her and the children. Now, £93 per annum back in the 1680s is equivalent to about £80,000 a year today. So it was a huge sum. And George Cheesley was absolutely furious with the way that the trial, the court had gone, the divorce had gone. And he wrote a letter to Sir George Lockhart saying that he deserved a speedy remedy, else he would attack him in Kirk or Merket. So Either he fixed it or he was going to attack him in the church or in the street. He didn't care. Now, on the 31st of March 1689, it was Easter Sunday, and Sir George Lockhart had attended the Easter service at St Giles. He'd attended it without his wife. His wife wasn't well, so she stayed at home in bed. When he was going to the church, he bumped into someone, and he vaguely recognised him. And polite society, go good morning, and never thought any more of it. But on the way out of the church after the service, as he's walking back to his house, he started to feel that he was being followed. And as he got closer to the entrance to Old Bank Close, he speeded up, and at that point he realised he was being followed, and he could hear, as he got into the close, he could hear footsteps coming up behind him, and then he heard the crack of a pistol shot. John Cheesley had actually followed him into the close and shot him in the back. Now, his wife had heard the commotion in the little street, and she came down out of her sick bed and tried to pull her husband into the house, but he died in her arms. Cheesley didn't run away. He just walked calmly out of the close, and to the gathering crowd in the Lawn Market, he announced that he had taught the president how to do justice. So as far as he was concerned, he had justice, because that divorce, as far as he was concerned, should never have gone the way it did. He should have been allowed to walk away from his family and not have to pay them anything. So he was promptly arrested, taken to the toll booth. Now, the toll booth stood just in front of us, in front of St Giles here, where he was tortured. Now, the forms of torture that were pretty common in the day: thumb screws. So, you know what it's like if you bash your nail bed, it's incredibly painful. So they would put pressure on the nail blade and screw it down and down to make you confess. And he was also tortured with the boot, which was like a sheath that was put around your leg, and then wedges of wood were hammered between your leg and the sheath, crushing your soft tissues. So you can imagine that would be incredibly painful, and it's not something you're actually going to recover from. So yes. Now, the reason they tortured him was to make sure that he was working alone, that there wasn't anybody else behind the scenes with this one, because they needed to make sure it wasn't a political assassination. And it turned out he was working alone. He was found guilty, and he was taken to the Market Cross. Now, at the Market Cross, his right hand was chopped off, because that was the hand that had fired the pistol. The pistol was placed on a chain and then put round his neck, and then he was taken to the Galilee, where he was hanged. Now, after that, his body was then taken to the Westport to be displayed. That was a very common thing that happened to criminals. Parts of their bodies or their whole body would be put on display, and this is to make sure that other people don't commit the same offences. It's like, we'll show you visually what will happen, and that'll make people behave. I know. Now, his body was displayed, like I say, but after 3 days it vanished, and that was quite common too, to be fair, because the families of the prisoners would kind of wait till it died down a bit and then go along at night and take the body down so they could take it away for burial. So his body disappeared. Now, in the Lawn Market area for centuries, people have heard sinister laughing coming up behind them. They've heard footsteps coming up behind them. They've heard cracks sounding like pistol shots, and all sorts of things, shadowy figures, missing an arm and dragging a leg and all this kind of thing, to the point that it was so ingrained into Edinburgh culture that if your children were misbehaving, you would tell them, watch out, or Johnny One Arm's going to get you. So it's gone on for centuries. Now, in the 1960s, they were doing restoration of some cottages at Dalry, and under one of the hearthstones they found a skeleton. It was missing an arm, and it had a chain and a pistol round its neck, and they believe that was where he was buried. Now, his body was taken away from there, the skeleton was taken away and given a proper burial, and at that point the sightings of Johnny One Arm kind of died down. Ooh. So yes, You better watch out or Johnny One Arm will get you. Now, moving on to another gruesome death. Yeah, it's going to be one of those nights that we're doing. So, hiya everyone that's just joined. I've just noticed I've got people joining, sorry. It's raining, so it's a bit damp here tonight. So yeah, so inside St Giles, the Marquis of Montrose, James Graham, is buried. Now he was a royalist who was executed on the 21st of May 1650. Now he was hanged at the Market Cross like a common criminal, and this was like an insult, because in those days if you were like a marquis or an earl or a king, you were beheaded, which was a much more civilised form of execution than being hanged. Anyway, so he was hanged. Now when he was taken to his execution, he was dressed in a black suit with a scarlet waistcoat and silver thread, and people said he looked more like a groom than he did like a condemned man. Now, once he was executed, his head was placed on a spike on top of the toll booth, which would have been just in front of St Giles. His limbs were sent to Scottish boroughs, and his torso was placed in the Borough Loch. It was buried in the Borough Loch. Now, for the royalists, he was like a symbol of martyrdom. And after the restoration of Charles II, who we're looking at just now on the horse, in 1660, Charles II, decided to take revenge. And he did it in various ways. And one of the kind of strange things that he did was the Marquis of Argyll. Well, that wasn't strange. He had him executed in May 1661. But then this sort of macabre theatre took place. It was a very grisly affair. You've still not got any rain where you are? Oh no, you can have some of ours. Yeah, this grisly theatre took place. It was reassembling the body. So Montrose was reassembled and buried in St Giles. 6 grave markers were paid £18 Scots for raising the corpse. There was actually 2 corpses that they raised. Sir William Hay was the other one. Robert Johnson was paid £3 for showing the burial place at the Borough Loch. Oops, sorry, that was me just stepping off something. John Noble, for 2 of the best velvet mortarcloths, was paid £24, including drink money, which I quite like. Now, scaffolding was actually erected for the removal of the head from the spike on top of the toll booth. You didn't really need the scaffolding, but it was all part of the show. Oh, never mind, Jose. So yeah, very, very grisly, you know. Then the body was reassembled at the Palace of Holyrood House, where his coffin lay in state at the Abbey, sorry, not the palace, it was at the Abbey, for 8 weeks. And then there was a magnificent funeral that took place, like I said, on the 11th of May 1661. So this is Charles II. It was meant to be Oliver Cromwell, and rather than waste the statue, we changed the head. So yeah, Charles II. I think I might have some rain on the lens. Just bear with me a second. There, that's better. Yes, now I'm going to move on back in time. We're going back to the 1400s, the 1430s, and we're going to talk about Sir Walter Stewart, Earl of Atholl. He was executed on the 26th of March 1637 for assassinating James I. Yes, there were more people involved in this assassination, but as soon as it went wrong, everybody backed off completely. You see, the king was assassinated, but the queen and her 6-year-old son survived, and he later became James II. Now, his wife at the time, the Queen, was in a very vulnerable position. She had to make sure her son did not lose his birthright, the throne. So she took revenge, and it was brutal. So, his execution took 3 days. Day 1, he was hoisted. So if you imagine a rope round each one of your limbs, 4 poles, you're pulled up into the air, and then they drop you, but they don't drop you the full way. They stop short of you hitting the ground. so that the momentum dislocates bones. So that was done over and over again. He was then put in a pillory, which with dislocated bones you can imagine would have been excruciating as well. And the final punishment that day was to have a red hot iron crown with King of all traitors on it placed on his head. So it was red hot, so that would have burned. So yeah, that was day 1. Day 2, he was placed on a hurdle, so like a stretcher I suppose you would say, and he was dragged at the back of a horse up and down the Royal Mile. Now you've got dislocated bones and severe burns on your head, and you're getting dragged up and down this street. That must have just been unbelievably painful. But it was all part of the show. She had to show people, if you attack me, this is what happens. Now, on day 3, the end came. He was placed on a bench on his back, right? So he's lying face up. There was a fire basket at his head, and the skill of the executioner was that he could disembowel him and burn his innards in the basket whilst he was still alive. And that's what he did. So he threw his innards into the fire so he could smell himself burning. And then the final act came when the executioner reached inside his body cavity and ripped out his heart. So yes, quite brutal. Don't mess with Scottish queens. So yeah, so I'll just let you have a wee, I'm going to just come in here for a second so you can see. I love these lights. It's a shame it's too early for them to be lit. They're really, really pretty. Well, you know, you mess with women, this is what happens. You know, she was protecting her son. She needed to make sure that her son, his place on the throne was safe. And, you know, back at that point in history, a woman is a man's property. So she was in a very vulnerable position, and any sign of weakness could have been awful. Now, Alison Ruff. Alison Ruff, yeah, basically don't mess with queens in general. It's just not a good move. I'm pretty sure there's other places that have similar. So Alison Ruff, she lived around 1480. I can't believe how much rain's coming out the sky. In 1480 until the 3rd of September 1535. Now she was an Edinburgh property and business owner who was executed for murder. She was born and bred in Edinburgh, so she was a native. And apparently she came from quite a well-off family. At about 1505 she married a merchant and lawyer called Jasper Main. Sadly he died at the Battle of Flodden in 1513. Like many other women of her day, Alison took over the business her husband had left behind, and she managed to actually accumulate quite a number of properties. It's getting heavier. I'm just trying to look for somewhere to hide. Right, there's a doorway. I might try that one for a second. So I'm just going to go over here and try and get out of the way, just because it's gimbal killing weather. Right, let's see if I stand up here we might be okay. There we are, we've got a wee shelter, so I'm just going to stand here for a little minute or two. Yeah, so anyway, she did get married again, but that ended in divorce. It didn't last particularly long. It was Thomas Lauriston she married in 1517. Now in 1531, Alison's daughter Catherine, so her last unmarried child, she had 4 of them, 2 daughters, 2 sons, married Alexander Cant, who was a very rich merchant burgess in Edinburgh. Now Alison moved into the new home with the daughter and the son-in-law, because his house was a higher status dwelling than she had, so she's moved in with them. Then in, I think it was 1533, Alison was sued by an Edinburgh merchant who claimed that she'd actually sold property to Cant, or given Cant property as part of the dowry, which didn't belong to her, it actually belonged to him. So she was actually found guilty of that. Now, after the court cases happened, she was found guilty, all three of them went back to his house. That night something happened and he ended up dead. So the two women were arrested. They did try to escape, but they were arrested and found guilty. Now, Alison was drowned for her part, but her daughter Catherine pleaded the belly. She said she was pregnant, and because she said she was pregnant, she couldn't be executed until she'd given birth. I'll just let you see, I don't know if you can see the waters running down here. Yeah, welcome to Edinburgh. Welcome to summer in Scotland. So that gave Catherine enough time to actually escape, and she made it to Germany, where she lived out her days. Now, I know it's a murder story, but there's lots of murder stories like that. But what amazes me about this story in particular is the Crown and Edinburgh fought for several years over the forfeited goods. Who was going to get the money and the property from Alison Ruff and what was left of Kant's property? It just blows my mind. They were more interested in what they were going to get than actual justice. Yeah, we've still got phone booths. Quite a lot of them have been turned into like book nooks, defibrillators, all sorts of things, cash machines. Yeah, and there's one of the wellheads looking very sorry for itself in the rain. So yes, so the old town has quite a lot of stories like this. The longest hanging took place in Edinburgh, and that was for a boy Robertson, or a man Robertson, but he was quite young, he wasn't the sharpest knife in the box, I think, was the problem, and the other people he was with when he committed the crime were much more clever than he was. So he ended up with the gun when he committed robbery, even though he didn't use the gun, but he was basically holding the baby. So he's the one that was found guilty and sentenced to death. Now, the hangman at the time was particularly inept. He was useless. He built the gallows, he got it all set up, but the trap doors didn't work properly, and Robertson was actually quite a big guy. So when the trap doors failed, he was actually dangling by his neck, standing on his tiptoes. So instead of a 90-second drop, snap your neck, you're done, he was slowly suffocating. And because of that, the Edinburgh mob decided that that was inhumane. They'd come to see him get justice, but they didn't, once they realised he was suffering, they kind of turned on the authorities, which happened quite a lot with the Edinburgh mob, to be fair. So what they did was they stormed the platform, they cut him down, and they ran off with his body. Now, they started to run uphill first, but unfortunately the town guard had called, the council had called out the army from the castle, so the army started to come downhill to try and deal with the Edinburgh mob. At the same time, further downhill, so around about here, is where the old police station was, and the police came out of the police station, and at that point the Edinburgh mob were kind of stuck, so they dropped the body and ran. Now, the execution took place at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The police dragged his body into the police station. They then had to call a doctor to see if he was still alive. So the doctor came out and bled him and checked, that, oh yes, he is alive. So then at 8 o'clock that night, they then took him back and hanged him. So yeah, it was a brutal way to die, because, if it failed the first time, they should have just let it go, I think. But anyway. Now, just ahead of us, we have the Clamshell, but that's Bell's Wynd, that little street you can see just running off there. Bell's Wynd has quite a famous ghost, the White Lady of Bell's Wynd, and basically there was a husband and wife called Guthrie living in Bell's Wynd. They had quite a nice apartment, and one day they just disappeared. So everybody thought they had moved out of Edinburgh, but their flat was empty, and nobody ever moved in. So, people kind of forgot about it. But there was a locksmith who was curious, and he wanted to see if it was actually empty and whether he could move into it, because it was bigger than his. So eventually he decided he was going to have a look. So he went up to the front door and he picked the lock and he managed to get it open. And when he opened the front door, he was greeted with a really eerie sort of scene. The dining table was laid, you could see where the food was, it was covered in stour, dust, and it was just as if people had sat down to eat and then vanished. So that gave him a little bit of a start. And then he, steadied himself and decided to go in further and investigate more. And then he saw where the bedroom door was. So at this point he's decided to go and have a look in the bedroom. So the door's locked. So he picked the lock to the bedroom, and as he opened the bedroom door, he could see the bed, and in the bed this lady in white sat up, put her legs over the edge of the bed, and then walked out past him. Now she was that close, she could have touched him, or she should have touched him, but he felt nothing, and then she kind of floated off down the close. So as he got closer to the bed, he realised there was actually 2 corpses in the bed. It turns out that Mr. Guthrie had been away on a business trip and he had come home early. And unfortunately for Mrs. Guthrie, who was entertaining her male friend, her husband didn't appreciate that and murdered them both, placed them in the bed, locked the bedroom door, locked the front door and left. So they weren't discovered for about 20 years. Now, another story I have, which is related to me, something that happened when I was 16, and I still can't explain it, and I don't even want to know really what it was. But back in the day, we had these things called YTSs, youth training schemes. It was basically child labour. I don't know how else to describe it, but anyway, I was on a YTS at the Carlton Highland Hotel, which is just down the road here. It's now the Hilton. And in the sort of belly of the hotel, it's underneath this bridge. So this is a bridge in front of us. This is North Bridge. So there's arches. And the changing room for the kitchen staff was under the arches of the bridge. And the female changing rooms were in one of the arches. Against the wall of the arch, there was a shelf that was about 2 foot high and it stuck out about 2 feet from the wall. So they had lockers against that shelf. Oh, making all that noise with a scooter. First week of Wimbledon and it was raining. What a nightmare. Oh. So anyway, so if you can imagine an arched room, you've got lockers against the wall. So there's a gap where the arch comes down at the sides, where the shelf could be seen. So I used to stand in that little space and get changed because I was 16 and shy, right? And it was the female changing room. So I was standing in there and I'd got taken off my whites and I was about to put my clothes on when I looked along the back of the lockers I don't even know why I looked along there, and I saw a man. And I was absolutely terrified. And I came flying out in my underwear into the corridor and bounced straight off the head chef, who was a massive man, really big guy. Told him what had happened, and he went flying into the ladies' locker room ready to kill. And he took the place apart and there was no one there. Absolutely nobody there. Just me. So yes, so I got my stuff, I left. I never went back. I have no idea what it was, what I saw, or why I saw it, but as far as I'm concerned, there was a man there. But there was only one way in and out of that room, and the head chef went in and out the same, so yeah, I have no idea what happened. But anyway, that was my bit of terror in the Carlton Highland Hotel. Right, ladies and gentlemen, I think I'm going to call it a day there because I'm absolutely soaked. I tried. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I'll try and do this one again when the weather's not being mischievous and making it all wet and horrible. But yeah, so remember tonight at 10 o'clock I'm doing Durrelton Castle. It'll be a premiere with live chat, so I'll be in the chat talking to you. So hopefully some of you will make it for that one and I'll be nice and warm and dry. Oh, thanks, I'm glad you enjoyed it. So just remember, if you like it, give it a thumbs up, and then, if you've not subscribed already, subscribe. Let you go. Oh jeez, this is bad. Oh, it reminds you. Honestly, it's just, you know, when it rains like this, you just have to go with it. There's nothing you can do. There's no point worrying. And to be fair, umbrellas, all it does is make the water run down your back. So yeah, I will hopefully see you. And if I don't see you tonight, I'll be doing, is it the 12th and the 13th, I'll be in Inverness. So I'll be doing at 8 o'clock again this time in Inverness, 2 nights. Okay, I'll see you all later. Right.